Okay.
Okay, good evening to all. My name is Tom Devine, Whiskey Bravo 2, Alpha Lima Juliet. I was first licensed in 1963 and currently hold an extra class license. I'm a member of the Ocean County, New Jersey Aries and Races, and I am an appointed volunteer as the Section Emergency Coordinator for the ARRL Southern New Jersey section, which encompasses basically the lower half of the state, but it only has 9 counties. So I've been asked by the team here, the planning team, to talk about introduction to emergency communications for New Hampshire. So I'm going to pretty much get it down to the very basics. There's also an additional presentation that I've been involved with that's on the ARRL website that has similar content, but this is a little different. So there's another recording there. It's a recorded presentation. So I will move forward, and I'm asking you to please hold your questions a little bit to the end if you can. That way, there's a lot of things that are going to be brought in, as well as there's a reference sheet of information that Dan already has to send out, and I'm going to open it up at the end of the presentation. So okay. First, who needs emergency communications, which is commonly referred to as ECOM? And
ECOM? No, MCOM.
MCOM. I'm sorry. Thank you. In today's world, we're dependent on.
You're gonna need to unmute yourself.
That happened. Thank you, Dan. Okay. In today's world, we're dependent upon cell phone services, internet services, and however, not everybody realizes, but they do get disrupted and they do get overloaded. And we all can remember a time when it's happened, and it's probably quite recently. I know we have problems regularly, and we're in a very highly densely populated state, and we still have those problems. Typically, the problems are set up as natural problems. It could be thunderstorms, tornadoes, hurricanes, ice storms, wildfires, floods, earthquakes, and solar storms. Solar storms are picking up, and with the new cycle, there's good things about amateur radio, but there's also some challenges about the negative impact of solar flares and geothermal induction into power lines, and that will take them right out. So that's one of the problems we do have. Man-made events are such things as operating errors, neglected maintenance, internet hacking, system overloads, civil unrest, and violence. And that seems to be a problem with us once in a while in the recent times. They've even taken out 911 systems. When the commercial cellular systems and internet services are disrupted or overloaded, the shutdown to the public, how do we contact our families? Especially when we're all separated. And some of us were talking about grandchildren a little bit before, but it seems as though these things happen when the family is scattered. And how do we get in contact with everyone? How do we contact emergency services such as 911 or fire, medical service, or police? Well, those of you that are new or returning hams, or even those of us who have been around for decades, have an opportunity, and that is we are a little bit ahead of the general public in that we can use our amateur radio skills, knowledge, and equipment to keep in contact. Oops, sorry. Okay. How and when do amateur radio operators become involved? Well, we can do it in two ways. Personal involvement, that is, we're a victim or one of our family members is a victim and we need that communications. Here again, we can also be the only communications on the scene. And thus amateur radio is used to communicate there when there's no cell phone or internet or so on. Now, you can also be an observer and you're the only communications, as I indicated. Now, you may think in the highly populated areas we go that we're always going to have cell phone service. As you and I know, it's not the case. And if those of you that are new hams, it's not the case. And I can even say in a densely populated state that I live, there's areas where we just don't have cell phone service. And I used to live in a different area of the state, and it was very common that we go up over the mountain and go into the next valley and there wouldn't be any cell phone service. And you might hit a repeater if you knew which one to look for. But it was that's just in the East Coast, and out West, it's even more of a problem. The ECOM team's members' involvement. You work as a volunteer operating in support of an agency to assist in emergency or disaster. The various organizations were going to be outlined later on, but here again, you can work as a team. And there's some advantages in doing that, and we'll talk about those as well. Example of individual involvement. Traveling in an unpopulated area, you come upon wildfire, washed out roads, tornadoes, vehicle incidents. It's pretty common. You might be able to use amateur radio at that particular point to contact somebody. If you know where the repeaters are in that area and you have VHF, UHF, that's good. But you have to do your homework before you go. That's one thing I always do when I do traveling. And I do like to go to the national parks. I do go state parks, national recreation areas, and the ones around near where I lived, I kind of know where they are. But when I go out west, and I have done that lately, I make sure I do a lot of research ahead of time. Another thing that's a great idea to do is utilize the wilderness protocol. Now, not everybody is always familiar with it, but the wilderness protocol is basically amateur radio operators monitoring national simplex frequencies. Usually most of us listen to 146.520 megahertz because 2 meters seems to be the most frequently frequency for us. And it has a pretty good range in the areas around state parks, national parks, and areas of poor communications. And you listen at the top of the hour, every 3 hours from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I'll give you the information on that if you want. It is readily available in the Aries Field reference manual. And I also put it on the information reference sheet that Dan is going to send out. Typical team roles, message handling for shelters or served agencies. Traditionally, it's been done by amateur radio by voice, but there's been a major trend in moving it toward digital forms. And Dan was talking about WinLink earlier. WinLink is one form. that is gaining popularity, as well as in some areas of the country, FL Digi, FL Message, which is getting to be popular. It has, some of them are actually, in some areas, both are used for different reasons and that. But WinLink is gaining a lot of popularity around right now, and quite good. The reason they're doing more digital is speed, yes, and accuracy. That's the real thing. And I think accuracy should have been first. Shadowing is another thing, and that is where amateur radio operator would shadow an individual that's running a particular event, which could be an emergency situation. The Marine Marathon in Washington, D.C. uses amateur radio shadowing the leaders. And most of the cases, the leader for the section is a Marine officer. And it's kind of interesting. I did have the privilege of working there one time for one of their marathons, and seeing the shadowing operation was kind of very interesting operation. It really worked quite well. Search and rescue communications. Search and rescue communications is a definite application that we can be used in, even in populated areas. We had a recent one along a parkway in the state of New Jersey in Ocean County, where there was an individual who had dementia, got away from his home, and the police tracked him with their dogs and that to a area, and then they lost the scent, and they couldn't find them. And the family and some of the other people asked that we get a search party going, and they asked the local Aries group to go out and do the searching. And well, we started out with a plan of using a local 2-meter repeater. Well, I was the first team out, and I had a leader in my team, just happened to be a trained tracker, who I found out later was a member of the state police. And we went across with a team of 12 of us, and I was communications. I went across the road and checked in, and they said, your signal dropped down, the repeater isn't hearing you. And I was in sight of the station area where we had to go to our backup frequency. So in search and rescue, you follow the old saying, always have backup frequencies, always have them, always plan on them, and make sure they're programmed in your radios. And I was only maybe 100 yards away from the EC and the command center, and they lost everything because of the terrain. And we were also under a high tension power line area, and we just didn't get anything. So search and rescue is a good thing to do, and it's good use. Here again, it takes a lot of effort, and it's a lot of physical effort as well as radio operation. Backup intercommunications, usually in the area where cell phone connections are not connecting or unavailable, ham radio can be used. In some cases where they know there's no way to interconnect communications, hams have been noted to set up portable repeaters. And many Aries groups have portable repeaters that they do use out in the field for such activities. I know our team here does. Amateur radio emergency communication teams are trained to assist with hurricanes. And I think the most popular one is the Hurricane Watchnet that monitors storms out in the Caribbean or any place that's 300 miles plus from the coast of the United States, with amateur radio operators collecting information and even transferring it to the National Weather Service Hurricane Center and as well. So the other thing is evacuation and flooding. Amateur radio operators can work as teams and assisting in communications for evacuations or monitoring floods monitoring the flood stage of rivers, streams, and coastlines. We'll talk about that in a minute, a couple more minutes, but sometimes that's done even before the local authorities declare a state of emergency. Power outages, telephone, cell phone disruptions, and other disruptions that take out communications, such as 911 centers. It's an ideal. I know our section included that as an activity during our last set, where we would actually go out and have our community, a hand would go out and represent the community and send messages into a central communication center, and then we would relay it to the state or the county OEM. So it was a good exercise. National Weather Service Skywarn is an excellent one. It's a great way to get skills. And most of the people who do that have their basic Skywarn credentials, and they can get that training through the internet in most of the National Weather Service areas. And they do appreciate it. And I was surprised during the winter storms that we had here this year. Our section got quite a few, at the county level, got quite a few thank you notes from the National Weather Service local office. There's 2 FCC regulations related to emergency communications and us as amateur radio operators. First, no provision of these rules, meaning the FCC rules, prevents us by the use of amateur radio for any means of communications. We can use any means of communications at its disposal to provide the essential communications needed to connect with immediate safety of human life and the immediate protection of property when normal communications are not available. Now, there's a clarification there, and it's the clarification when normal communications are available. We'll talk about it in another couple of slides, but it's basically telling us we can use any method we know and use it in an emergency situation as long as there's no commercial communications available. So second provision is if you as an operator or your station is in a disaster or emergency situation, no provisions of the rules prevent you by any amateur station in the disaster of any means disposal. You can use any means disposal to contact your location and get assistance. No provision of the rules prevent us from using this circumstances in the disposal of amateur radio in a disaster situation. So we can even broadcast in a disaster situation, disaster information to others if it's necessary. That's if there's no commercial communications available. So it's kind of interesting. The rules are a little bit flexible, but the clarifications are, this is the important part, people. The prior to rules, there is no commercial communications immediately available, such as a telephone or cellular phone. Here again, that's the first caveat. The second caveat is the regulations have been limited any means of communications in that amateurs cannot, and I will repeat, cannot operate emergency service frequencies such as used by police, fire, emergency medical services. At the same time, and that came out of people abusing the situation, as you probably figured out. And 60 meters has become the amateur radio and authorities intercommunication area that they're using in quite a few places. And they run some drills on that frequency, usually every year. One is scheduled for in May of this year, the first one for the year. And basically, it's a point where we can intercommunicate with FEMA, we can intercommunicate with other government agencies. However, amateur radio is a secondary provider or secondary user of that. So if a governmental station comes on with their unusual call letters and asks for the frequency, we have to give it up to them. And so we're secondary. At the same point, it provides us an ability to work with FEMA and some of the other agencies during emergency situations. Also, that band, the 60-meter band, is also used by the state of Alaska as a channel for the state authorities to monitor some of the citizens that are remote, some of the remote villages, and they have their own upper sideband channel, if you might want to call it that, for that communications. And it's not someone, you don't have to have a license for it, but it is a 5.16 megahertz, and I won't give the rest of the frequency out, but it's a publicly available for use, and it's upper sideband. Personal, team, both involvement. In other words, as individuals, we probably, and I think we're going to probably ask you at the end if any of you have had these, but you can realize personal involvement is probably rare or infrequent. I know it has been with me. If you're going to come across an incident, it's pretty rare. It's like being at the right place at the right time when you're needed. But we have to be prepared, and we have to be prepared for loss of communications. And being a couple of decades of life, I noticed that we have lost dial tones more now than we did before. So communications with the telephone system is it's going to the internet more. And when the internet goes out, we lose phone service. So it's harder for us to contact our families and contact the community. And we see occasionally 911 systems, emergency management, fire connections, where whole systems go down. And that's an area where amateur radio can service, especially if you've got a community and you can get to your local hams, can contact them. And it's been proven that it works quite well, and it's a good service. But at the same point, you can even help your own family out that way. One thing you want to do when you get involved with emergency communications is the amateur code. If you remember it, it's in the reference material we're giving you at the end. The category of patriotism or patriotic station, skills always ready for service to the community and your country. So keep it in mind, but something we want to remember. Why join? First, emergency communications, and it's all the emergency communications teams. I'm not here speaking for any one particular one at this moment. Provide training and mentoring. They provide you knowledge, skills, abilities, and practical exercises to learn from. They try to keep you current with the changing roles of emergency communications. Every time there is a major incident, most of the good, well-organized teams will have an after-action report and look at lessons learned. So that's how we do. We learn from our experiences. So that's where the best knowledge comes from. So that's where you gain knowledge. It's a forum for sharing ideas on equipment, on technical operations, on antennas, procedures, and it really works out quite well. I know I went to a first county level areas meeting we had face-to-face in almost 2 years last night, and there was a lot of sharing of ideas and techniques and discussing potential problems, and it was a great open conversation, and that's what we primarily did the whole evening because we had been away for so long. Assess the potential challenges and seeking solutions. A lot of collaboration and problem solving takes place in the teams, not only just in the meetings, but in the Zoom sessions they have, in the weekly nets they have, and even some teams actually are teaching digital communications on weekly nets over the air, as well as using a combination of voice and doing all kinds of things. So, and there's a lot of satisfaction when you serve the community. And a lot of times serving the community is they'll help fundraisers by providing communications for walks or runs, marathons. But that gives them a learning experience on learning how to set up communications, and you rotate who's your net control so people get experience to do it. And it's a great way to learn, and it's a great way to get pride for serving a community. We did one recently where the Scouts, Cub Scouts were also involved, handing out water in that for a walk. And it was a walk and a run around a reservoir. And it was kind of funny because we were all done. One of the parents says, "I lost my son. He's a red-haired Cub Scout." So they announced it on the radio network. And didn't you know he was running the course all by himself, all alone, and we tracked him, and we could see him going from point to point to point where we had the operators placed on the track. And the parents said, "Okay, as long as we know where he is, he's fine." And he was just timing. He wanted to do the race himself and see how fast he could run it, but forgot to tell his parents. Oscar, you're the one that's going to have the grandson. Okay, e-com teams, most common. Amateur Radio Emergency Service, ARES. It's sponsored by the Amateur Radio Relay League at the national level, but it's usually local teams. Usually the local teams are county-based. Some are town or municipality-based. They usually have an emergency coordinator in charge of that team that coordinates it, but they're local. And being local, they run local nets, and they have a lot of local activities, and they do help out local community activities as well. And one of the things they may do is they may also service the local community, and they service the local community. It might be the Office of Emergency Management for that county or municipality, or they could even service hospitals if hospitals need emergency communications. Whatever needs emergency, and some of them are even getting down to the point of teaming up with CERT teams that are used for search and rescue and other activities in various areas. So that's flexible. Some of the ARES teams have a sub-team called a rapid response team, and its job is really quick response to an emergency situation, set up the radio equipment, set up communications, and get everything organized where the rest of the group is gathered and get in place and put into planning. So in other words, they are the first on scene, first to help until they get the rest of the teams together. Works good, but you need people that are trained a little bit more than the normal, as well as equipped and also available to move quickly and get anywhere within your territory of your particular group. Usually it's at the county level most of the time. Also, there's what we call mutual assistance teams. Now, the Aries mutual assistance teams are teams usually within a section or a region, and I'll get to that in a minute. First, they have them within a section. What they'll do is they're trained in all the areas of operation. They practice with each of the county teams, and they can do VHF, UHF, HF. They can do digital communication, whatever is necessary by any of the county teams, or in the case of the state, if they service, or if any of the teams service the State Office of Emergency Management, they're frequent in that. There's also forming in some parts of the country, and in the Mid-Atlantic states, there is a group called the Mid-Atlantic Aries MAT, and it's the Mid-Atlantic Amateur Radio Emergency Services Mutual Assistance Team, and it's comprised of multiple sections in different states, and they have come up with a working arrangement to share resources among those states. And there's a lot of little issues that people don't think of when you start mutual assistance teams in credentialing, moving them, making sure you have them put into a staging area, someplace outside the affected area that the civil authorities may barricade, and then they're met by a local person and then taken through security clearance and that, and to where they're needed. So those are the things that these mutual assistance teams have to work out, and the regional ones have to work it out at a regional level that crosses state lines in most cases and section lines. And it's interesting. Sky One, excellent service by Aries. And we found in most of the areas in our section and the sections adjacent to us, that if the county level, each county has a Sky One coordinator, they collect the damage information, what the Weather Service calls the ground truce, and that's hail, snowfalls, damage, unusual storm clouds like tornado clouds or such as that. We've had derechos in our area recently, and they're almost like tornadoes, and they make a lot of damage. And we report that damage to the National Weather Service as quickly as we can, but we do it on a county basis. We do that because then if the National Weather Service here needs to get information, they have a contact who can then whittle it down to the town, but they have a coordinator they can use. So it seems to be working quite well. The Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Services, or RACES, is a governmental agency. It's been around since after World War II, and it's been here a long time. It operates under the FCC 97.407 rules, which does restrict them to some of the communications that they may do, messages they may handle, the lengths of drills that they may have. This brings up a situation where what a lot of states have done is combined Aries and RACES people together. And it got so much so that sometimes the emergency coordinator for the Amateur Radio Emergency Services and the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Services radio officers are the same person. And that's quite frequently used in most of the counties in my section. There's a reason for that. And the reason is, before an emergency, they can ask Aries people to go out and set up equipment at shelters, monitor flood areas, monitor other items that they need to monitor and pass that information back. And then once an emergency is declared, those Aries people put on their RACES hat and now work directly for the Office of Emergency Management. And they take all their orders through the ICS system, and those follow all the rules for the ICS system, and communications are all done that way until the emergency is undeclared. And when that happens, if there is cleanup that has to go on, and there is air pockets where communications are spotty, where they need a shadow person to go with damage assessment people, or they need shadow people to go with people going out and still doing searches, teams doing searches or stuff like that, they can then let Aries people handle that side of it. So RACES has to be declared, and once it's not declared anymore, then they can flip back and let the Ambulatory Emergency Service people do that. It's the same people, they're just working both sides of the house. Sometimes RACES and the next group, Oxcom, to be members of those organizations, they do require background checks. And that's popped up recently, and it's popped up quite frequently recently over the past few years. Oxcom is getting a lot of, and Oxcom is auxiliary communications, emergency communications. They're similar to RACES when they're using amateur radio frequencies. And if they use RACES frequencies, which are amateur radio frequencies, their operators must be licensed, FCC licensed. If they're using shares frequencies, they don't have to be licensed. Most organizations prefer to have amateur radio operators because of their knowledge and experience and so on, but they don't have to. Give you an example, Southern New Jersey, Northern New Jersey, Oxcoms, Delaware, Oxcoms, there exist to have county level, some counties have Oxcom, some have RACES, the state levels are RACES. They all use amateur radio frequencies. However, if we go to North Carolina is operates on shares frequencies, federal frequencies, and they do not have to have licensed operators even though they desire them. So it's just, here again, there's a couple of different ways to go, and some of it's related there. And there's some controversy going on between that, but here again. Military affiliated radio service, MARS, is connected to the Defense Department. They're quite involved with 60 meters and COMEX exercises that go on throughout the year on 60 meters to do comparisons and interact with amateur operators and MARS operators. Most of those are ham radio operators. It's a good organization. Salvation Army Team Emergency Radio Network, Saturn, as it's called, is another emergency communications group, and they operate within the Salvation Army organization. And they also, as I just found out recently, they work with the Hurricane Watchnet to handle messages for them, which is the next one down. Hurricane Watchnet, I mentioned before, the Hurricane Watchnet basically gathers information from islands, ships at sea, coastal areas, relays that to the National Weather Service, plus information from all other particular stations. Their net operations are on high frequency, usually 20, 40 meters. And they usually are activated when there's a storm within 300 miles of the mainland. And sometimes they have storms out there where Oscar lives, and they activate sooner. Here again, Hurricane Watchnet is been around a while and very popular. If you're interested in emergency communications team participation, I'm going to bring up a list a little later on the screen, but that list is also been given to Dan to provide with the link to this particular presentation. There's two general categories of emergencies and disasters. We kind of all remember that probably. Those that are hams do. And that is the possibility, we have a possibility of warning, preparation time. Key thing, hurricanes, there's preparation time. They gather the information, the Weather Service tracks it. We do have time to get people out there, set up stations, and get prepared. Snowstorms and ice storms, we do have, because of the Weather Service, we do have the ability most of the times to get prepared, not always. And we might not have enough, but we do. Flooding is another thing we sometimes can predict because we know the heavy rainfall and it gives us a chance to set up and predict. However, immediate situations are the ones that get us. There's no warning. Tornadoes. And I put tornadoes and derechos. Derecho is straight line wind, if you're not aware of it. I saw people on there from Iowa and Idaho. You know what I'm talking about. We do have them here in the East Coast. And here in Ocean County, one of our barrier lines get 90 to 100 mile an hour winds on a beautiful sunny day all of a sudden. And the weather changed, and that's another. Hailstorms seem to be more common lately. For someone, hailstorms seem to be more common lately all over. Earthquakes, some parts of the country get a heavier hit than others. Search and rescue, you never know when that's going to come up, but it's useful. And our infrastructure disruptions, power, water, communications, they do happen. Where can you be used? Well, the potential role for trained amateur radio operators, you can bridge intercommunications gaps between served agencies. In other words, if there's no communications between served agencies, they can use amateur radio. Create communication networks that link disaster areas to outside. Hey, you can get in there, use amateur radio to go to a shelter, set up, and tell the loved ones of people in the shelter that they're safe. And that is a major help. However, realize it's easy to get messages out. It's very difficult, almost impossible to get messages into a disaster area to find out where somebody is. So there's usually 10 times the number of messages going out than possibly could get in. They don't recommend taking messages inward. Provide critical disaster served agency leader shadowing. This is important, especially when their systems fail. Now, a lot of these people in Red Cross and some of the other organizations rely on cell phones. And cell phones have a tendency of becoming overloaded A lot of people are unaware that the authorities do have the ability to turn off the cell phones to regular users and use them for emergency purposes. So amateur radio can be a big help there. Monitor critical conditions, infrastructure, flooding, roads, bridges, and report status on a regular basis. This helps out local emergency management enormously. Damage assessment is another one that fits in there, and the Weather Service likes that as well. Pass informal and formal messages. As I said earlier, you can do it verbally, which is great, but there's more of a shift to moving it towards digital communications only because of accuracy and speed. How do you get involved? I'm going to give you a list in a minute. Information is updated. The key is a lot of people don't realize emergency management teams, the operators, you learn from lessons from the past. I've said that before, but I got to really stress it. The other thing is some people think that they can wait until there's a disaster and then run over to an Aries group or Oxcom group or one of the other groups and say, I'm here, I want to help. Some of them will accept you and give you a job assisting another operator, logging, maybe running messages, helping out with stuff, but you're going to be still you're going to shadow an experienced operator. Other organizations will just turn you away. And that's because they want to make sure that people are trained and know what they do. And as I said before, some governmental agencies will push you away politely, but they don't want anybody in certain areas unless they have done background checks on you. And this is a problem in some of the RACES groups and Oxcom groups that I work with within my area. Okay, now I'm going to show you, I'm going to drop this, Dan. I'm going to bring up one more item with your blessing. I'm going to try one more screen, Dan. Okay. And then we'll open up the questions. The document that Dan has that he's going to send out is, we have the links. We wrote it for new people, and there's the links, websites for the age, how to get involved. There's some sites to learn more. The learn.arl.org is a good site with a lot of emergency communications equipment on it. There's some videos on there. And there's also access to online courses, Introduction to Emergency Communications EC001, basic course. You can take it online. You can also take it. Sometimes you can get it locally. I know we offer it locally occasionally. We get permission to run a class. We have run live classes face-to-face. We've run Zoom classes in that course. The second course, Public Service Emergency Communications Management EC016. We've run that Zoom classes. We do that through our Mid-Atlantic Amateur Radio Emergency Service Mutual Assistance Team, ARIESMAT. We've run both those courses through them, and that's where I disappeared from this group too. Some ECOM groups also work with FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management, and use their courses. They're available online, and usually I've listed the ones that are most common but please check your agency because some of the agencies are very specific on the letter after the 100 and 200 and 700. That's the version number. Some of them don't accept old versions. Wilderness Protocol is on here as well, and it's also referenced in the ARRL resource manual. And by the way, that's free on the ARRL website to download. And the amateur code. And 60 meters. Dan, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna open it up to questions with your permission.
Well, permission granted.
Oh, I see familiar faces on here. No questions?
Barry, how we do it in chat?
No questions in the chat,
I see 10 chats.
but none of them are questions. They're all comments and stuff.
Okay.
Well, it's a great presentation.
I have to add that if you're interested in e-com and you have your QST magazine, this month, the public service section, page 69, talks about what happened in Florida. And Barry may have been there. I don't know if anybody else was there. But it's kind of interesting to me when I read it because it looks like some of the resistance between Aries and Oxcom may be slowly reducing. And some of us remember that between Aries and Races, which and Aries, Races, and Oxcom, I know get along very well in my section. They get along very well north of me and south of me. So, but in some areas there's a little resistance. So that seems to be reducing. So I just add that because I read it and it's very, very interesting.
Well, us hams, some of us get along better than others, but we all get along all the time.
Yeah.
All right, Dan's got his hand up. Go for it, Dan.
Well, Tom, thank you very much. It's great to have insight from other parts of the country. Been a long time since I've been on the East Coast. And the discussions that compare Aries to Races to Oxcom to Mars all need a reset. I think John Peterson has a Facebook page called Brothers and what is it?
Sisters.
Oxcom Brothers and Brotherhood and Sisterhood. And he posted a description of Oxcom's place in the world yesterday or today. And basically, it's not a group. It's not necessarily a standardized set of certifications. It is a training class, and it is a recently rewritten position task book that accommodates both deployable and non-deployable members of whatever a state decides Oxcom is going to be a requirement for in that state's emergency communications system. And so I think a lot of friction comes up just because the definitions aren't really clear. RACES used to be the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Services, which was only active with a presidentially declared civil defense emergency that took amateur radio per se off the air. And those operators who were designated as RACES operators could use whatever the locally authorized NTIA frequencies were according to the local, used to be called served agencies. Now they're authorities having jurisdiction. And Army Mars is Army and there used to be Air Force and Navy. I think now there's only Air Force and Army Mars, and you don't hear much from Air Force Mars, it is in fact a sort of, they're right now, I think they all report through Fort Huachuca. And when you listen to them define their function and role, it is very different than it was 25 years ago. It doesn't even resemble what it used to be. But yet and still, the whole thing is, it's the use of licensees of the amateur radio service to provide support for communications when either nothing else works or there ain't enough of everything else, given the circumstances. So I think we figure all that out, and then we can start working together with a little bit more, a whole lot less friction. I'll say that, because the amateur code tells us that we all love each other all the time. And that's really a good place to try to keep it.
Dan, that's perfect. You summarized it summarily. When I was asked to be section emergency coordinator, I took the attitude to teach everybody we're amateur radio emergency communicators, period. I am an Aries section emergency coordinator, but I have an Oxcom team in my section. I refer to everybody. Thank you for being amateur radio emergency communicators. We all service the state level. The state level in my state is RACES. Okay. Even though there's Oxcom groups in some of the counties throughout the state, in the northern part, which is one section, and the southern part, which is another section. And the northern section is in one division of ARRL, and the southern part is in another division of ARRL. And so, but we all get along, we all communicate as long as we take that attitude, and it works. And here again, the state is even getting us to take the Oxcom classes. Okay, and as they can get them in, I have gone, section manager has, then the section emergency coordinator in another part of the state has gone as well, because we all talk and we all work together. We all work together. And you said it better than excellent. Thank you.
In the FEMA regions, there's some similarity emerging about recognition of Oxcom as simply a training element that's used by the states as they see fit. And then again, there's California, which writes its own rules. And somehow they sent me to the Oxcom class in 2016, and it's the nicest thing they ever did for me. And Aries, I think, is actually the least well-defined function right now, which is such a challenge for every radio club and every Aries group in the 2,000 jurisdictions.
But I have to tell you something. The pandemic has really brought a lot of people together. The pandemic in our state, the state decided to shut down all the county emergency operations centers to anybody from the outside. The state emergency center as well was shut down. But as soon as that happened, nobody could go in to operate their drills. The amateur radio operators picked it up right away. All the drills happened on the same time. They always did, but they were doing it from their home. And we all just said, hey, we're all emergency communicators. We're going to do it. We're going to keep it up. And we kept it up. Now that they're going back into the emergency operating centers, and they're not all open yet. Situation is, you hear the same people on the air, but there's some more people involved because, for us, the Coast Guard's involved, Coast Guard Auxiliary, and some of the other ones are involved because we have a lot of coastlines. Situation is, that's good. And that's what we're trying to do, Dan, what you're saying. We're all just emergency communicators.
Or so what we have, we're all in this together. Tom, you got your hand up? Tom?
Yes, sir, I do. I wanted to point out a couple of things, and one is that somebody mentioned that you don't hear much from Air Force Mars. I put a comment in the chat. They have converted Air Force Mars to a unique mission, providing long-range SSB communication for Air Force aircraft, and they recruit by invitation only. And the stations operators that are recruited have to have what I'd call a contest class station. It's a very strong, very well-equipped, laid out station with pretty darn good antennas. And that's what Air Force military auxiliary radio service is doing these days. I made inquiries to the Air Force public relations people, and they told me that. They recruit by invitation. You have to have certain things already available to you before they'll, consider inviting you. And I realized right away by their brief description, I wasn't going to have that sort of resource anytime soon. So just to make it clear why you don't hear much from Air Force Mars, they're doing a unique mission which requires very strong station. And the other thing I wanted to point out was that there's a difference between floods and flash floods. The official position of the Weather Service is you'll get a warning with floods, but flash floods are merciless. They can come out of nowhere and submerge entire campgrounds full of tents with no warning whatsoever. So be aware of that. Back to that.
All right.
Comment.
Steve, did you want to say something?
Yes, I have a comment on the Air Force Mars, if I have a minute.
Sure.
The program he's talking about, I believe, is MarsCom. It's under Air Force Mars, but it is separate. The only thing required for Air Force Mars to be a member is that you're an amateur radio operator and you have an HF station. But we do 2 nets a day and tons of traffic back and forth, practicing every day. So but he was right. There is a separate entity under Air Force Mars that's all they do is the stuff with the aircraft and whatnot. But and they are a lot stricter than what the normal Air Force Mars is. So that's all I have. Over.
Okay, thank you for the update. I'd heard about one, but not the other. Now we know about both. Dan, you got your hand up?
Yeah, question for Steve. Is Air Force Mars headquartered elsewhere than Fort Huachuca? Do you know?
Yes, they are. That is Army Mars. There's
Okay.
only two left at this point, Army Mars, Air Force Mars. Here in Region 10, we have about, oh boy, I don't know, roughly 300 Air Force Mars members, and Army Mars is around 50, I believe. So they're pretty spread out, not many here in this region.
Yeah, used to be Army Mars was a genuine time commitment because there was a fairly large number of hours every week. We had to be reporting, well, large number of nets we had to report in to accumulate sufficient hours to remain members of Army Mars. And a lot of that was used up passing health and welfare traffic.
Yep, they still have the requirement. Army Mars has a few more hours than we do. They go by quarters now. I think Air Force Mars, you're required 12 hours per quarter is all, which doesn't amount to much when the nets are an hour long. So, but yeah, they both have that.
Right. And my comment was based on all the groups of amateur radio operators who have any interest in emergency communications can go to throw their support or put their support where they feel it will do the most good. In addition to Saturn and Southern Baptist, there's faith-based groups all over the country and tribal groups where amateur radio is can be used as a significant leveraging of life safety emergency communications. So, and RATPAC's done all, I was going to say to Tom, from New Jersey, that if it weren't for COVID, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. So in the sense that the pandemic's been a horrible learning experience for all aspects of professional life in the United States, it's done the amateur radio service an ineffably large amount of good, I think. Compliments of the RATPAC.
Well, thank you very much. It has helped amateur radio in some ways, and it's not helped them in other ways. But we've done some progress here. Tom, you got your hand up again? Go ahead. Tom?
Dan, if I may, I'd like to ask a question. Has anybody have an experience here where they were one of the first people on the scene, there was no communications, and used amateur radio to summon assistance? And I'd like to hear the story.
Well, I can always say mine. Anybody else got one out there?
W3 TDH.
Okay, Tom, go ahead.
I put it in chat, but I was on the way back from doing the amateur radio portion of the Skywarn Basics class way out in Western Virginia, and I'm in by the nation's capital in Maryland. But I was the only Skywarn coordinator available to go out there, so I went. And the night turned somewhat miserable, and I suddenly came upon a portion of an interstate highway where all the cars were laying off to the right and the left. Thankfully, only one no longer had the greasy side down, but they were all scattered all over the place like the toys belonging to an angry 3-year-old. None of them were still on the road. And it didn't hit me right away what the cause was, but I was already listening to the Skywarn net. So seeing trees scattered and cars scattered, I gave the damage report, said type of incident unknown, but it looks to be weather, and said, somebody who's in this county, please get on to the 911. I can't raise them. There's no cell phone service here. And tell them what's happened. I said, I've got 25 vehicles off the road in view here. And I gave them the mile marker. And I said, more undoubtedly down the road from me. I just can't go any further because there's so much debris all over the road. And they sent out an EMS mass casualty task force, a fire and rescue, heavy rescue task force, as well as a boatload of state police officers. But the police officers didn't get there until all the cars had been checked or popped. And they transported a boatload of people out of there. And it was totally by accident. I just happened to be driving down the road and came upon the situation. And I'm glad I wasn't 5 minutes earlier, I can tell you that, because those cars were well off the road and it looked like they'd been swept with a broom.
Okay, Dan, you got your hand up?
Yes, I do. Countless times. I worked for the National Park Service for 34 years and largely duty stationed in all the right places. And countless times I've been the first on the scene of traffic accidents, buses rolling off mountainsides, and radioed them in through the park radio system. And here in Yosemite in 2020, I hired the guy who was the branch chief of the telecommunications branch in the park. And he actually installed a all mode, all band amateur radio in my office with antennas on the roof. And this was before I think shares was, spread throughout the federal agencies to the extent where a lot of parks had it. It's just always been a useful thing. whether the government services are working or not. I've called in fires to CAL FIRE driving, the 50 miles home from, actually not really 50 miles, it's 55 minutes and about 30 miles of road driving home from my office in the park to where I am southwest of Mariposa itself on amateur radios. You see smoke coming up in the river canyon and that time of year, and it's not good. And you better not stop and dawdle because you might not make it home that way and have to turn around and drive 3 hours going the other way. So the wilderness protocol, and Tom, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I thought it used to be every hour for the first 5 minutes of the hour, and then it went to every third hour for the first 5 minutes. And now I think it's only 3 times a day for the first 5 minutes after the hour. In other words, they're sort of making it a broader thing. But I mentioned in the comments that at least in the parks near where I am, Yosemite, where I worked, and Sequoia Kings Canyon, there are amateur radio repeaters co-located with parks primary repeaters on the highest peaks, so that there's good radio coverage for repeaters along at least 100 miles of the western aspect of the Sierra. It doesn't reach everywhere, obviously. And in my always scanning list on some handheld nearby, I keep a simplex, the calling simplex frequency in a scan list with all of those repeaters. And yet you never know, somebody someplace, call their wife. Can I call a tow truck? Can I call CHP? Just relaying what someone says accurately on the phone and document it in your logs in case anything comes back to need further explanation makes me feel like I'm doing something useful at least some of the time. And I think Starleak's having a really bad night because I can't hear you.
Yeah, you can. You just got to turn my mute back off.
Okay. Maybe Dan's having a really bad night.
I seem to be. Paul in Montana, you had your hand up, you took it back down. Do you still want to say anything?
Yeah, we were on a 7-day bicycle ride. We did it every year, cycle greater Yellowstone. And I ended up being at the back of the pack with the course monitor. And we had one gentleman, he looked like he was in distress, and we went up beside him and he gave us the thumbs down. There wasn't very many places to pull off, but there was one about 50 foot up. And he fell off his bike right after I got out of the car and started going back to him. Went over the handlebars and he died right there. But we had an ambulance there within like a minute and a half. The ambulance was on the course, no cell service, nothing out there. But we were all there ready to go. And we did CPR on him, but couldn't save him, which was a bad thing. But,
Okay, there's some good stories here. We're running over here, so we'll probably should start wrapping this up. I'm going to turn it back to Tom. Tom, what you got?
I just want to say thank you to everybody. If you're talking this Tom, want to say thank you to everybody, and it's nice seeing you as well as giving the presentation. Thank you for asking me, Dan. It's a pleasure. My notes said you asked me back in February.
Tom used to be part of our RATPAC planning committee, family commitments, as well as other things he's already committed to in terms of his SEC responsibilities. Kind of cutting his time short, so he left us, but he didn't leave us. We think about him often, and it comes up in conversation a lot. We miss him a lot. Miss you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody has questions about the regional Aries mutual aid, emergency services mutual aid, I'll hang around and stick on here after everybody else has a chance to go on, because that's something I've spent a lot of time on. We've done a lot of training on as well. That's taken a lot of time because it takes a lot of time to train these courses. And we've done that. In fact, Tom from Maryland was in one of my classes. And situation is it's turning out to be a very worthwhile activity that I think other areas, as the amateur radio operators seems to average age getting older. And I'm saying that as one of them. It's a way that we can help each other out in in an emergency situation. So, but it takes some effort. So that is an important thing that some other sections should pick up. And hopefully they do. Dan, thank you very much. And thank you to all of you. Nice seeing you again, all of you. And gee,
Good seeing you,
Anthony
Tom.
didn't have any questions for me, which is, I'm surprised.